Well, in my last podcast, I did a brain dump of all what I thought were my best ideas regarding work. I want to do the same thing today about relationships. I want to start with a few questions that you might want to ask somebody who you either have a little relationship with or you want to deepen the relationship, but who knows, maybe it might even be applicable in the beginning of a relationship. So these are questions that have yielded really interesting answers. I ask these questions very often. My wife drags me to these fundraisers and parties, and I'm really quite an introvert, but I have these questions I ask very often. I will search out somebody who is who's looking alone and maybe might want company, and I'll walk over to that person, and after the usual pleasantries about, hi, my name is Marty, my wife, I make a joke, my wife dragged me here, what brought you here? At the first right moment, I might ask one of these three questions, and again, these three may be applicable in a wide range of circumstances. One was, well, what do you want to talk about? Another is, what are you thinking about these days? Or, what are you looking forward to? Those open-ended questions give a lot of space for the person. Now, some people really hate that amount of open-endedness and it puts them on the spot. But in general, it's normally worth giving people that space so they can choose to focus on what they care to focus on. Then, of course, your job is to listen your butt off. And then, so you don't interrogate, don't necessarily follow up with another question, but amplify or build on what they said. Find a point of agreement, especially, is usually comforting. So that's my first thought about, people stuff. Next is the real thorny question is, should you, at least at this point in your life, be in a romantic relationship? We all know that, if you listen to any song, love makes the world go round. Love is the thing that gets talked about the most. Movies are so much about romance, books, novels, everything. And some people are in real life very, very happy in their romantic relationship. It's the best thing in their lives. But you all have heard, unfortunately, of also stories of people who are fighting like crazy, or who are just schlepping along, or who are that nightmarish half that divorce, and it's very often bitter and protracted and expensive. At this point, the question is not a generic one, but for you at this point, should you be in a romantic relationship? It depends. First of all, take a look inward. How good a partner would you be in terms of ability to give, ability to ask, being not having a fatal flaw like a drug addiction? Not a good thing to be in a relationship. Don't look to somebody to rescue. You'll probably just drag them down with you, or at minimum it's unfair to the person. Ask yourself that. And then there is increasingly an option which I think more and more people are considering. Women are increasingly consider it because they're more economically viable than they have been in the past, so they don't need a man to support them, as certainly many women don't. And many men are, in this era in which men are quite often given quite a hard time by women. They say, I think I'd rather go it alone. So the solo option is an increasingly viable option for both sexes. I guess these days there is no binary. It's wherever you are on the continuum. And it's great in some senses because you really have you're not compromising all the time. You're down to what room temperature you want to sleep in, what to watch on TV, what to eat, where to go. And you can certainly, of course, a romantic relationship doesn't necessarily mean monogamous or marriage. It can simply mean you can have a limited one where you say, okay, you know what, I want to go it alone most of the time, but on Saturday night it would be nice to have a date or whatever. So, but more of a solo option, all the way to the recluse option, is increasingly viable. Don't succumb to the societal norms about being coupled. Really decide what's right for you at this point in time. Okay. Now, then there is the question of going all the way, so to speak. I don't mean sexually, I mean getting married. I like to think that whether it's marriage or any kind of long-term relationship, there are, it is emotional. It can't all be reduced to a report card because some of it is just a feeling. But it could not hurt for you to evaluate a relationship, a long-term relationship or a potential spouse, or whether you want to get divorced, on these criteria. First of all, how compatible is your arc sexually? I'll explain that. Let me unpack that to use the current term. Most relationships start out pretty hot, but what happens is when things are right, the sexual desire remains roughly, they stay in parallel for a long time. It may dissipate somewhat over time, but it dissipates at the same rate. But where the problems come in is where one person remains hot to trot and the other person is hot to sit there. So, one item on the relationship report card is your sexual arc compatible? Second, of course, is the out-of-bed life, which of course becomes increasingly important as the relationship gets some months and years on it. Do you enjoy just talking about each other's day? Do you enjoy asking each other's opinion? Do you enjoy watching a movie in your cocoon at home and making little comments and you both enjoy it? You take a walk. Do you enjoy being with each other? Both in terms of verbal, but just simply feeling good walking next to that person or sitting next to that person. A third thing is economic viability. It is extremely difficult in this day and age to make it on one income. So it's not essential, but it's usually a big plus if both of you are contributing significantly to the family income. Another characteristic that's important on the relationship report card is lack of a fatal flaw. Yes, sometimes people who have severe mental illness or physical illness are a perfectly fine romantic partner, but very often that's a formula for difficulty. And it may be that that's not the person you want to be in a long-term romantic relationship with. And of course, if that's true for yourself, maybe you don't want to go there yourself in terms of a long-term relationship. And then finally, there is the I'll call it the pedestal factor. It's not an easy world out there. People are very judgmental or they ignore you. It's really nice to come home to a romantic partner who basically gives you a break, puts you on a little bit of a pedestal, not some god or goddess, but where, more likely to see the positive in you and more likely to praise than to criticize. That's an important factor in the relationship report card, at least certainly for a long-term relationship. And finally, there is the ineffable wild card. Does it simply feel good? Does it feel good to be with this person long-term? Not all the time. We're not always going to be, tingly with excitement every time we see our partner. But in general, does it feel right to be with this person for a long term? So that's my little relationship report card. May be applicable, especially if you're trying to think about a longer term relationship and even marriage, especially in a world in which half the couples divorce. A lot of others fight and stay together, say for the kids, and others just kind of schlep along. You want to be pretty damn careful, and the divorce laws are such that it can be expensive, protracted, and very psychologically stressful. So those are some thoughts about a long-term relationship and evaluating it, period. I want to talk a little bit about something called the Relationship Summit. It was actually, I've been with my wife now for between the 3 years of living together and 44 years of marriage, 47 years. Roughly, maybe halfway through our marriage, we were hitting a rough patch. And I'm not saying everybody can afford to do this, but we decided to go to Hawaii for a week and do what we call the marriage summit. You can do this in your own house, in your own apartment, or whatever. It's but it was certainly lovely to do that. And every time we went for a typical 7-day vacation, and we would start the morning. We would have coffee or breakfast, or whatever, and we would spend a half hour doing the following. Each one of the 7 days, we picked a topic, whether it be sex, or money, or our child, or our out-of-bed life, career, the meaning of life, whatever. There were seven topics. And what we would do is we would start by each person saying what they would like to change, what they like about what they themselves do. If it was me, I would say what I like about what I'm doing in that regard, say around career or sex or relationship or whatever, the non-sexual part of the relationship. And so one thing I like about what I'm doing and one thing that I want to change, not what I want her to change, because that avoided a lot of confrontation and builds more investment. And then when I finished my saying what I like about what I'm doing in that regard, say, again, it could be around money, she would go and she would say something she likes about the way she's handling money and one thing that she might want to change. We then agree to one thing that each of us wants to change and we write it down in a little memo pad or what, I don't remember what we used. And then that only took a half hour. Then we enjoyed the rest of the day, the breakfast, the Hawaii, all the pleasures that Hawaii brings. And after the 7 days, our relationship really was a lot better. Oh, and then we agreed that once a week we would go out to dinner and we would do a review of how we were doing on those things and maybe change up what we were wanting to change or not. And we did that for maybe 2 or 3 months, once a week, and it really was invaluable to our relationship. Really good self-help thing. Okay, next. The mature marriage. Like I said, I've now been with my wife 47 years, and I certainly hope to stay with her forever. And of course, things change over the 47 years. The things I want to say that I think are relevant to what keeps our marriage is not made in heaven, but it works here on earth. There's a lot of acceptance. There are certain things that Barbara is going to be just very different. For example, she loves to travel more. She loves dancing. There are certain things that I don't like either of those things. So I very much encourage her to go travel on her own or with a girlfriend. And dancing, I encourage her to go by herself or with a girlfriend or whatever. So some of it comes down to acceptance, and there's some things we argue. But I don't want to, it's not fair to Barbara for me to bear any dirty laundry. But there is one issue on which we have you, and that's all I want to say about the mature marriage. When I come back, we're going to talk about your romantic partner as a friend. We're going to talk about making and deepening platonic friendships. We're going to talk about befriending your parent. We're going to talk about parenting, using surprisingly guilt. We'll talk about why that's often wiser than rewards and punishment. We're going to talk about helping your child make good friends. We're going to talk about finding a mentor, being a good mentor and a mentee, and whether you should get a dog, and some thoughts about how to make the most of that dog without making yourself go nuts. In any event, I need to take a break because this is a podcast as well as a YouTube video. It'll only be 10 or 15 seconds, so stay with me. I'd appreciate it. Okay, we're talking relationship. I want to talk about your romantic partner as friend. It's, you can't necessarily say that your romantic partner is going to be your best friend. There are different people serve different functions in our lives. But ideally, you certainly want to make your romantic partner a good friend. And that comes down to, and I've tried to not say the obvious, but it does come down to listening and being supportive in general. It doesn't mean you tolerate really bad behavior, but your friend is a good friend is somebody who's relatively not judgmental. If giving advice is asking permission first and being tactful in giving the advice, erring toward the positive, listening well to what they say. One of the best things my wife and I do is every night we start out by saying, okay, Barb, tell me about your day. And I listen, and I will listen and maybe ask questions to understand more deeply or whatever. Or I might make a suggestion. I'm not averse to giving some unwanted advice, but I try to do it tactfully. And then we always do it where it goes for, I ask her first. She runs down her day. I listen carefully, including my body language. I'm not on the phone. I'm really looking at her. I sit at the breakfast bar, and she's usually in the kitchen, and I'm, she may be cleaning up or whatever, and I am listening my butt off. And then we reverse roles. That builds a friendship. Again, the friendship part is in also commonalities, not romantic or sexual, but just doing the things we like to do together. We like hosting one couple for dinner, socially distanced, with all the windows open in our big sunroom. We like taking walks with the dog. We like getting on the floor with the dog. We like sitting in our cocoon binge watching things like Call the Midwife or Masterpiece, like The Crown. We do the things we enjoy. We enjoy playing gin rummy. We've been playing gin rummy since 1977. We have a big fat book that we've been keeping score the entire time. We never play for any money, but we keep track of how much money. At this moment, I think Barbara owes me $652, which I will never see. But it's kind of fun to keep track, and it's history. So all of that leads to a friendship. It has nothing to do with sex, which is so often seen as the defining characteristic of a romantic relationship. But it makes us friends. And of course, we have the sense of history for having been together so long. Okay, now what about platonic friends? I would think, because I'm older, many of the people who are watching this are not 16 or 20. They're more likely 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80? Who knows? Anyway, so you've had enough time on this earth that you've already identified some friends you've had. It might not be a bad idea if you're looking to make a friend or to resurrect an old friend. Even think back as far as elementary school. Is there somebody who you just clicked with, whose pace, whose intellectuality or lack thereof, whose degree of fun-lovingness, whose degree of integrity, who just feels right? reaching out to them and saying, hey, it's been 50 years, but you just popped into my head and I was just wondering what the hell you do, and I Googled you and I found you on, classmates.com or simply Googling you. Chances are they're going to love to hear from you. And it may be nothing. You may not want to be a friend again, but that's one of the sources of friends. A good source, maybe the best source of new friends is old friends. Let's say you're trying to make a new friend, though. Where? Think about where you picture your good, intimate friend being. Would this person be somebody who would be taking an online class in this COVID era? I'm not talking about in-person things particularly. But, whether it be an online class or an online political discussion group, some neighbors that you get, that you meet outdoors, socially distanced. Think about where your target friend would be. To be somebody who shares a hobby of yours, whatever. So the where question is a useful source. And then it is important as you evaluate the friendship. There are a lot of people who complain about friendships being one-sided, where they're doing all the listening, it's a pity party, and it becomes old after a while. You really want to keep to a relationship that it's not going to be 50-50 every time you talk, but where over time it feels roughly equal. And those are my thoughts about making platonic friends. Now I want to talk a little bit about befriending your parent. I always thought of my mother and my father as their parents. And yet now that they're both gone, I really wish I had tried to befriend them and ask them questions like, tell me about your childhood. What were you like as a kid? What did you care about? What did you do? What was school like for you? What were your friends like? What did you do after school? How did you get along with your parents? Just a million questions that can open the door, and to the extent you feel comfortable sharing stuff about your own life, so that you're, instead of just being parent and child with the authority relationship, at some point you're old enough that you can be friends, and sometimes your parent can be your best friend. Just a thought. Now I want to talk a little bit about parenting. Just one aspect of parenting, for because of the brevity of this, I can't go into great detail, but perhaps under-considered approach to parenting is parenting by guilt. I mean, psychotherapists spend a whole lot of time to tell you how to avoid guilt and shame, but I often think that parenting occasionally, you invoking guilt can be excellent parenting. Why? Because when you invoke, I'll give you an example. Let's say your child doesn't come to the dinner table on time, and now the dinner is getting cold, and your kid says, I want to finish my video game. To say, I know you're an important part of this family. I know you want to be, and you don't want to let us all down. So why don't you join us so we can all enjoy the hot meal? That invokes a measure of guilt. It doesn't say, it's not rewards and punishment. If you come here, we'll let you have dessert, or if you don't come here, you're going to be grounded. It's invoking guilt, which invokes intrinsic motivation, which is much more likely to endure and become a part of your child's fabric when he or she leaves home and goes to college and becomes an adult, than if they're only behaving because they're afraid of a punishment or because you're going to reward them. So guilt, I don't mean inordinate guilt, but invoking a sense of intrinsic motivation by invoking a bit of guilt can be an under-considered good form of parenting. Now, helping your child make good friends, and again, I will talk about myself here a little bit. My parents somehow inculcated in me that it was a good thing to show off your attributes, and I'm a pianist. And so I would show off for kids. I was verbal and precocious, so I would be the first one to shoot up my hand in class, or sometimes even blurt out the answer. Not surprisingly, and something just a general show off. And of course the kids hated me, but I had no idea, because for whatever reason my parents led me to believe that sharing what your abilities are is a good thing. And I was hated. I had like one good friend, and I would have, in retrospect, and it was very painful because I wanted to have friends like most kids, and it would have been great to get the feedback that no, most kids hate being shown up. So if your kid is having difficulty making good friends, really observe your child with other kids, whether it be if they've come to your house or you're observing them on the playground, or ask the child's teacher to observe him or her and see what's going on. Is there some tactfully offered feedback that could be helpful? And of course, once you ask your child, is there a kid you like who you think would be a good influence on you? And then, of course, you're going to encourage that kid to be invited to your home. And, of course, you're going to be nice and friendly, but not overly hovering. When they come over, offer the milk and cookies thing, and then kind of stay out of their way, unless you're really concerned, drug problem or whatever. But in general, the kid needs to feel, if you're inviting somebody over to the house, the kid needs to feel, of course, socially distanced and all the whatever the rules are with the COVID in your jurisdiction. But encouraging that, including later on maybe sleepovers and helping maybe the kid join the friend joining on a family trip. Those are the kind of things that a parent can do to help ensure good friendship for your child. And now I want to talk a little bit about mentoring. I believe that one-on-one is the most potent way to grow. And many of us go through life wishing we had a mentor and don't. If you would like to find a mentor, it's a mistake to try to find a mentor and say, well, you made my mentor. It's too much. It's like asking somebody, do you want to go to bed with me as soon as you meet them? It's too much, too fast. Instead, ask a question. Think of somebody who you trust, liked, maybe a professor, maybe somebody you encountered at work, whatever, a family member, and simply ask a question, whether it be by email or a phone call or in person, and simply ask the question. If they seem glad to give you the answer and they give you an answer you felt worthwhile, then you might first start with a little reciprocity. You might say something like, that was really helpful. I appreciated it enormously. Is there any way I can be of help to you, or something, so that it's not just a one-way relationship. But in any case, if you like the first answer, you might at some point ask a second question, and then little, by accretion, the relationship becomes a mentor-mentee relationship. And finally, if we're talking, this show is about my brain dump on my best ideas about relationships, I couldn't conclude this without talking about doggies. I've had a dog my whole life. I love my doggie. People are shocked that I, who's this workaholic person, I work 70 hours a week, would have a dog, and I'm really quite assiduous in taking care of my dog. We do 4 walks a day, including 1 long hike. I spend a good few minutes each day in little spurts on the floor playing with the dog. He sleeps in the bed. I love my dog. Why? First of all, of course, it's the unconditional love. It's the physical touch is comforting, but it is like a baby who never grows up. You must be extremely responsible. You can't let your dog cross his legs. You've got to take him out as often as needed. Or I have a doggy door, but he likes the exercise, needs the exercise. We go out 4 times a day. Make sure the food, unlike my previous dogs, if I left his food out all the time, he would get fat. We tried that and he ballooned. So we give him a handful twice a day, and that's it. But you got to give him that twice a day. You don't want your dog to be hungry, let alone starving. It is, and then there are vet bills. So it's lovely. I love it. I would not want to not have a dog, but it's a really big responsibility. And I would encourage you to get your dog from a rescue or a pound, because you are likely saving a life. And they're, instead of being purebreds that have all kinds of much higher risk of inbred diseases, you're getting a hybrid of some sort. My current dog, he is 75% miniature poodle, 15% basset hound, and 10% cocker spaniel. So he's got hybrid vigor. So they're better dogs, they're cheaper dogs. I have a friend who spent a couple $1,000s on a dog. My dog cost $150. So consider, if you're going to get a dog, get a rescue. And that's it. So those are my thoughts on relationships. If you stayed with me all this time, I'm honored. And if you're watching on YouTube, I would actually, whether it's on YouTube or the podcast that's on iTunes or on Spotify, I welcome your thumbs up. I welcome your positive comments, and accept your negative ones, and your thumbs down if you deem appropriate. And I especially like it if you share on your social media, so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. And in any event, I do thank you for watching or listening. I am Marty Nemko.